Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah share. We are holding a Mishnah Berurah Chelik Gimel, and Amir Hashem today we will be learning Daf Ches Amid Beis and a piece of Daf Tes Amid Aleph as well. That is the Dirshu schedule page for today. We are continuing to learn Hilchos Shabbos, and we are quite the way through the Simanim that have to do with Amir La'akum Baruch Hashem. It's been a very complex sugya, but it's very nice to work our way through it. Our learning today should be a schus for Achenu Kol Beis Yisrael, Hanasunu Batzaru Ba'ashivya Ha'imdim Bein Bayom U'Bein Bayabasha Hamakim Yerachem Aleihem V'Yetzieh Mitzar L'Rvacha Me'afelu L'Oira U'Mishibud L'Geula Hashta Ba'Galo V'Zman Kariv and Amar Amen. So we pick up today on Ches Amid Beis, 3 lines down in the Shulchan Aruch, Siman Reish Mem Hey Sif Vav. So, if we go back to the very beginning of our discussion of Amir La'akum, if we go back to Gimel Amid Aleph, Siman Reish Mem Gimel Sif Aleph, the Mechaber told us a halacha. The Mechaber told us, Lo Yaskir Adam Merchatz Shaloi La'enoi Yehudi. A Yid is not allowed to rent out his Beis HaMerchatz, his bathhouse, to an Eina Yehudi. Now, after all the dust settled, after learning all of the Mishnah Berurahs and everything else, we understand what's the halacha that Mechaber was telling us. The Mechaber was telling us that really, this Yid, Ruvain, has a Beis HaMerchatz. Really, if he wants to rent it out to an Eina Yehudi for a flat sum, so he's going to rent out the Beis HaMerchatz for $1,000 to an Eina Yehudi. And the Eina Yehudi is going to fire it up on Shabbos and be open for business on Shabbos. And he's going to keep all the revach. He's going to keep all the revenue. Really, the Mishnah Berurah told us, Me'ikar hadin, this should be mutter. Why should it be mutter? Well, there's no Amir La'akum, because Nachri Adaited and Avshei Kavad. He's not acting as a shliach of Ruvain, the owner of the Beis HaMerchatz. Really, Ruvain, the owner of the Beis HaMerchatz, is totally removing himself from the Beis HaMerchatz for Shabbos. Yes, he's renting it out, but he's getting a flat fee from the Eina Yehudi, and he's getting that flat fee. It doesn't matter whether Tony opens up for business or not. It doesn't matter if he makes money. It doesn't matter if he loses money. Ruvain is getting a flat fee for the rental of the Beis HaMerchatz. So, there's no Amir La'akum problem. He's not a shliach. Tony's not a shliach of Ruvain's. As far as schar Shabbos, so we learned that the only way this is mutter is if it's done behavla, which would mean that Ruvain is not renting out the Beis HaMerchatz to Tony just for Shabbos. He's renting it out for Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. So he's not getting schar Shabbos. He's getting schar for Friday and for Sunday, and the schar Shabbos is muvla. It's swallowed up together with the schar that he's getting for the other days. So really, when it comes down to it, me'ikar adin, it should be perfectly mutter for Ruvain to make this deal with Tony. Why does the Mechaber and Reish Mem Gimel say it's aser? The reason it's aser is because of Maris Ayin. What's the Maris Ayin? It simply was not done. It wasn't the typical way business was done to rent out a Beis HaMerchatz b'schirus. It wasn't done that way. How was it done? Typically, the way it was done was, if somebody owned a Beis HaMerchatz and there was a day that he couldn't work, he hired a schir yom. He hired an employee. Go open for me and I'll pay you a salary. Now, for a Yid to do that on Shabbos, for a Yid to hire an Eina Yehudi to open up his Beis HaMerchatz on Shabbos, and the Yid is going to keep the revenue from the business, and the Eina Yehudi who's managing the Beis HaMerchatz is an employee, he's a per diem employee, a schir yom, that would be aser me'ikar adin. And since that's the way business was typically done, if Yankel Shmerel is walking down the street and he sees smoke coming out of the chimney of Ruvain's Beis HaMerchatz on Shabbos, he's going to be chayshid Ruvain that Ruvain hired a schir yom to run the Beis HaMerchatz for Shabbos, which would be an Issa D'Rabbanan of Amir La'akum. So we asered this deal, which really should be mutter, me'ikar adin, we asered it because of Maris Ayin. That's what we learned at Siman Reish Mem Gimel. Now, Another very pertinent fact for what we're going to learn today from Reish Mem Gimel is that we said a tanur, a commercial baking oven, has the same din as a Beis HaMerchatz. So if a Yid owns a commercial baking oven, he is not allowed to rent out his commercial bakery oven to an Eina Yehudi for an Eina Yehudi to operate it and keep the revenue on Shabbos. He's not allowed to do it even if there's no Schar Shabbos involved because he did it b'havla, and he's not allowed to do it even though it's a schirus arrangement, which is mutter mein ikar adin because the Yid is totally removed and the guy is not considered his shliach. But it's still aser because of Maris Ayin, because the same way this wasn't done by a Beis HaMerchatz, it also was not done by a tanur. Now, against that backdrop, let's see the halacha here in Sivav. Says the Mechaber, a very interesting case. You have a Yid who has a tanur. He has one of these commercial bakery ovens. So guess what happened? Im afu einam Yehudim betanura shel Yisrael b'Shabbos al karchai. What happened was, einam Yehudim came, and they went and they fired up Ruvain's bakery oven, and they baked bread in Ruvain's bakery oven on Shabbos, and they did it bal karchai. Now, normally bal karchai means against his will. It doesn't mean over here against his will. It doesn't mean that they put a gun to his head. What it means is he didn't even know. He didn't give them permission. These Einam Yehudim went. They got access to Ruvain's tanur, and they fired up Ruvain's tanur on Shabbos, and they baked bread in it on Shabbos. Okay, there's definitely no Amir La'akum over here, right? Ruvain didn't say a word to them. Maybe he didn't even know that they were doing it. So there's Zichar no Amir La'akum. But how about Schar Shabbos? Says the Mechaber, Im afu einam Yehudim b'tanur shel Yisrael b'Shabbos al karchai. If this happened, v'nosnu loy pas b'schar atanur. And now the Einam Yehudim came, and they said, well, Ruvain, thank you so much for the use of your oven. We would like to give you some of our delicious artisanal breads as payment for the use of your oven, and they give Ruvain 10 beautiful loaves of sourdough as payment for using the oven on Shabbos. Says the Mechaber, also lehanos mimenu. Ruvain's not allowed to use it. He's not allowed to have any hana from those breads. Why is he not allowed to have hana from those breads? Because they're Schar Shabbos. It's true, he didn't let them use the oven on Shabbos. Maybe he didn't even know that they were using the oven on Shabbos. But the bottom line is they used Ruvain's oven on Shabbos, Be'isr, and now they want to pay him for that usage by giving him bread. And like the Mishnah Berurah is going to say, it doesn't matter. The fact that it's bread that came out of the oven is not negeya. The same halacha would be true if they came and they handed him a $100 bill. And they said, thank you so much for the use of your oven. Here's $100 in compensation for us using your oven. He received Schar Shabbos. And Schar Shabbos is Aser. And the Shulchan Aruch says, and you can see this in the Dirshu footnote, I think it's number 20, it says over there that Aser lehanos me'olam. It's going to be Aser forever. So this bread is Aser b'hana forever. The money is Aser b'hana forever. You're not allowed to take Schar Shabbos, and it would be Aser. Now, there's a couple of important details here. Let's take a look at the Mishnah Berurah Chav Gimel. Says the Chavetz Chaim, Im afu einam Yehudim. Ayin b'bach soif Siman Reish Mem Gimel. Take a look at what the Bach writes at the end of Siman Reish Mem Gimel. Shekasav, where he writes, the Iri deloy afu by rak b'Shabbos. The case that the Mechaber is discussing is where the Einam Yehudim only used the oven on Shabbos. They got access to Ruvain's oven on Shabbos. They used it on Shabbos, and now they're giving him the bread or the money or whatever it is. They're giving it to him specifically for Shabbos. Therefore, even though they did this completely without permission from Ruvain, it doesn't matter. Im yekabel hakikar, were Ruvain to accept the payment, if he accepted the bread or the money or whatever it is, noitel schar Shabbos. The fact is, he is accepting schar Shabbos. There's no way around it. This bread is coming as payment for the use of his oven on Shabbos, which is schar Shabbos. Aval, however, let's say, im afu by oid sha'ar yamim, but let's say these people used the oven for other days as well. So let's imagine a scenario like this. Let's say these Einam Yehudim came and they said, you know what? We want to rent your oven. We want to rent your oven for Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. And the Yid says, look, you know what? I'll go ahead and I'll rent it to you for Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, but I'm not renting it to you for Saturday. I'm only renting it to you for Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. And these Einam Yehudim, they have the keys to the bakery, so they went in, they baked Wednesday, they baked Thursday, they baked Friday, and then they came in Saturday morning too, and they baked Saturday too. And now they come and they give Ruvain bread or money in payment. So then, says the Mishnah Berurah, Avalam afu by oid sha'ar yamim, if they baked over there during days of chayil, during weekdays beside Shabbos, mutar l'kabel mihem schar Shabbos gam keid b'havlah. Then Reuven could accept the bread that they give him in payment, even though he finds out that they actually baked in the shop using the oven on Shabbos as well. Why? Because that's havlah. We know that once you have havlah, you don't have a schar Shabbos issue. Now we don't look at the bread that he's receiving as being schar Shabbos. It's not being given to him specifically for Shabbos. It's being given to him for Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Shabbos. So then he's allowed to take it. Not only that, says the Chavetz Chaim, va'ayin be'bir halacha, take a look at the bir halacha, dibra maschil im afu, where he says, dezem muter afilu loy haya ha'afio bal karchoy. This would be muter, even if the Einam Yehudim used the bakery oven on Shabbos with Reuven's knowledge, even if Reuven let them use it on Shabbos. So what would that scenario be? That scenario would be Reuven went ahead and rented out his bakery oven for Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Shabbos. Now that's usher. Reuven wasn't allowed to do that. Now, the payment that he receives, the bread that he gets, or the money that he gets, is not schar Shabbos. Because as far as the Isser of schar Shabbos is concerned, since they rented it for days of Chayil and Shabbos, there's havlah. So there's no Isser of schar Shabbos. What is the Isser? The Isser is what I told you in the beginning of the shir from Siman Reish Ben Gimel. You're not allowed to rent out your bakery oven for Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Shabbos. Why? Because even though there's no schar Shabbos, there's maris ayin of Amira La'akum. Because when Yaakov Shmerel walks down the block and he sees smoke coming out of the chimney of Reuven's bakery oven, he's going to think that the Einam Yehudim that are working the oven are per diem employees. He's going to think they're schira yoim, and he's going to think that Reuven is being over on Amira La'akum. So it's also because of maris ayin. So says the Mishnah Berurah like this. He's bringing down here from what he writes in the Bir Halacha. V'ayin be'Bir Halacha tezem muter afilu lo ha'afia bal karcha. Reuven is allowed to keep the bread or the money that he receives in payment if it's a case where he rented out the bakery oven for days of Chayil and of Shabbos, which he's not allowed to do because of maris ayin, but he did it shaloi kehilchasa. If they gave him payment, if they gave him bread or money or what is it, he's allowed to keep it. Because even though he's doing an Isser, renting out his bakery oven to them on Shabbos, he's doing an Isser, maris ayin of Amir La'akum, the Chanal B'Reish Siman Reish Ben Gimel, like we learned at the beginning of Siman Reish Ben Gimel, Mikamokum b'di'evid ein lesser scharoi. But b'di'evid, the payment that he receives does not become Asr. Why? Because now we're dealing with an Isser only of maris ayin of Amir La'akum. It's not schar Shabbos. That's mutter because of havlah. It really isn't Amir La'akum because me'ikar adin schirus is mutter. It's nachri adaita den avshei ka'avid. You're getting a flat fee for the use of the bakery oven. The nachri is working adaita den avshei. He's not your shliach. So really, as far as Amir La'akum, this is mutter me'ikar adin. As far as schar Shabbos, there's no schar Shabbos because there's havlah. So really, there should be mutter. The only isser is maris ayin. And we learned in Reish Ben Gimel, if you want to see it inside, you just take a look at Tav Dalin Amid Aleph in the words of the Ramah that begin at the end of the very first line of Dalin Amid Aleph. Im avar v'hiskiroi b'makom isser. If you went out and you rented out something like a Beis HaMerchatz or a Tanur to an Eina Yehudi be'Isser, when you're not allowed to do it because of the Isser of Marisayin, Yesh Oimrim shescharei mutter. We say that the schar is mutter b'di'evet. So over here, to Isser b'zehu rak mishum Marisayin, you're allowed to keep the schar b'di'evet. U'kamosh kasavda b'seif Siman Reish Mem Gimel b'Mishnah Berurah Sif Cotton Tes Zayin. Okay, now one more Mishnah Berurah over here in this beautiful Siman. Says the Mishnah Berurah is Cotton Chav Gimel Chav Daled v'nosnu loy pas. The Einim Yehudim gave Ruvain payment in bread. Says the Mishnah Berurah, lav dafka. It's not dafka that they paid him in bread. You might think, oh, maybe it's aser because it's bread that was baked be'isser on Shabbos in this oven that really they weren't supposed to use. Says the Mishnah Berurah, no, lav dafka. To our dinim nostal loy mois. If they gave him $100 bills, the same halacha. The money is aser me'olam. It's aser ba'no because it's Schar Shabbos. Aser le'lekamo b'hem. He's not allowed to accept it. So why does the Mechaber talk about bread that was baked in the oven? V'ov dehoya b'pas. The Eli Rabbi says, you know why the Mechaber said that? Because that was the story that happened. Ma'isa shahoya kachoya. And that's what the Mechaber was referencing. Okay, wow. That Siman Reish Bem Hey, what a ride. Really, I have to encourage everybody. It's incumbent upon everybody, really, to try to spend some time chazering, because you'll see that when you go over the Shulchan Aruch, the Ramah, and the Mishnah Berurah that we've learned, now every day you see some more detail and you see more facets of the halacha. When you chazer it over from 30,000 feet, you put all the pieces together, it really all starts to come together much more so than you just see it once day by day. Now we go to Siman Reish Ben Vav. Siman Reish Ben Vav. Dinei ha-she'ela v'haskara le'ena Yehudi b'Shabbos. The halachas that govern lending kalim or renting out kalim le'ena Yehudi to a non-Jew on Shabbos ubai hey seifim. And here we have 5 seifim. It says the Mechaber Sif Aleph. Mutter lahashil ulahaskir kelav le'ena Yehudi. You are allowed to lend out or rent out a keli, a utensil of yours, to an Eina Yehudi, even if he's going to do meleches iser with your keli on Shabbos. So you have a lawnmower, and Tony, your neighbor, wants to borrow your lawnmower. You're allowed to lend him your lawnmower, even though he might take the lawnmower and cut his lawn on Shabbos, which would be an Issa Daraisa. So he's doing meleches iser of Shabbos with your keli. You're allowed to lend him your lawnmower. You're allowed to rent your lawnmower to him. Why? Because there is no commandment in the Torah that says that my kalim are not allowed to perform a malacha on Shabbos. We have an iser shvisas behemtoi. Your animals, you're not allowed to have your animals do malacha on Shabbos, but your lawnmower, you're allowed to have your lawnmower do malacha on Shabbos. Now, one great caveat that we're going to see spelled out in the Mishnah Berurah, but I just want to tell it to you right away, right now. The Mechaber just said, you're allowed to lend out your lawnmower. Okay, you could lend out your lawnmower even though the Eina Yehudi is going to do malacha with the lawnmower. Well, there's no problem with Shvisas Kalim, so he's going to use your lawnmower on Shabbos. So what? There's no problem of Amir La'akum. He's not doing anything for you. He's cutting his own lawn. This has nothing to do with you. So there's no Amir La'akum. Schar Shabbos, there can't be Schar Shabbos. There's no Schar. You're lending it to him, so there's no Schar. But the Mechaber also said that you're allowed to rent your lawnmower out on Shabbos. So the Mishnah Berurah is going to say right away, you are not allowed to rent your lawnmower to an Eina Yehudi so that he can cut his lawn on Saturday, because then you're making a revenue off of your lawnmower on Shabbos. That would be usher because of Schar Shabbos 101. That, of course, would be usher. What we're talking about over here is if you're renting it out, you're doing it b'havla. You're renting out your lawnmower for Friday, Shabbos, and Sunday. So then you're not making Schar Shabbos, you're getting it b'havla. That's when it's mutter. So fine. So the Mechaber told us a halacha over here. You should know there's no such thing as shvisas kalim. There's no such thing. Therefore, you could lend out your lawnmower. You could rent out your lawnmower as long as there's no Schar Shabbos to an Eina Yehudi, even though he's going to use it on Shabbos. Now, we need to go weiter in the Mechaber to properly be able to process the Mishnah Berurah that we're going to learn. So says the Mechaber, V'yesh omrim. However, there are those that say, Baragola brings this down, the Rosh, in the name of Rabbeinu Yoina, V'yesh omrim, the kelim she'oisim mehem malacha. If you want to lend or rent out a keli which is used for meleches iser on Shabbos, like a lawnmower, kigoyin macharesha, like a plow, the kayotzeba, or other types of kelim that are used for meleches iser, aser lahaskir le'ena Yehudi, you're not allowed to rent it out to an Eina Yehudi be'erev Shabbos. You're not allowed to rent out or lend out a keli of yours that is used for meleches iser to an Eina Yehudi on Erev Shabbos. Now, this Yesh Omrim is not arguing on the day of Rishona brought down by the Mechaber as far as Shvisas Kelim. This Mandi Amar also holds that there's no such thing as Shvisas Kelim. This Mandi Amar is introducing a different Isser. What this Mandi Amar is saying is like this. You have a Keli that is used for Meleches Isser. You're not allowed to lend it. You're not allowed to rent it to an Eina Yehudi I just misspoke. Not that you're not allowed to lend it. Be very careful. Take a look what the Mechaber says. Yesh Omrim the kelim shaisim ben malacha, kelim that are used for meleches iser, kigan macharesha v'kiyotzeba, asa lahaskir. You're not allowed to rent it to an Eina Yehudi be'erev Shabbos, on Erev Shabbos. You know why? This Mandi Omer holds that there's a new iser. And that is, if you rent out a keli of yours, you rent out your lawnmower to an Eina Yehudi, on Erev Shabbos. So you're renting it out right before Shabbos. And now the Eina Yehudi is going to use it to cut grass on Shabbos. People are going to think that he's doing it as your shliach. Now, why would he be cutting his grass as your shliach? Maybe you have some kind of deal. Maybe you're a landscaper and he's paying you. I don't know what. But since you're renting it out on Erev Shabbos and you're making a deal, you're getting money for your keli. And now the Eina Yehudi is doing malacha with your keli on Shabbos, there's an Isser of Marasayin. It looks like he's doing it b'shlichusai. It looks like he's doing it as a shliach of you. Uv'yom ha'chamishi, but you want to rent it out on Thursday? Mutter lahaskir loy. That would be mutter. Because once it's already distanced from Shabbos, it's on Thursday, now it doesn't look to people like when he's doing malacha with your keli on Shabbos, he's doing it as a shliach of yours. If he was doing it as a shliach of yours on Shabbos, you would have given it to him on Erev Shabbos. Why do you give it to him on Thursday? Elamai, he's doing it for his own purposes. And now, says the Mechaber, and this applies both to the day of Rishona and the Yesh Omrim, like I spoke out, ubelvad, anything that we're saying is mutter is only mutter, belvad shelo yitol schar Shabbos ela b'havla. But of course, if you're renting out a keli, if you're making money in rent from your keli for Shabbos usage, it can't be schar Shabbos. It can't be that you rented it out specifically for Shabbos. It has to be done b'havla, that you rented it out for a weekday period and a Shabbos period, so that there's no schar Shabbos problem. Continues the Mechaber Kegoyin, for example, sheyaskelo l'chodesh or l'shavua. So, for instance, you rented it to him for a week. You rented it to him for a month. So then, there's havla. Ula hasheloi, and to lend your keli to an Eina Yehudi, mutter afilu b'erev Shabbos. Even the Yesh Omrim, even the Day Shniya would say that to lend your keli for Shabbos is 100% mutter. Why should it be aser? There's no Amir La'akum. He's doing his own work. There's no schar Shabbos. You're not getting paid. There's no Marasayin. There's no... Why is there no Marasayin? That the Mishnah Berurah is going to speak out. There's no Marasayin because if you're not making money, if people don't think that you're making money on the deal, then there already can't be Marasayin. What kind of Marasayin? When they know that you're making money on the deal, so then it could look like you hired him. But if you're not making money on the deal, so then it can't be Marasayin. Okay. Now that we've seen the Mechaber, we could jump into the Mishnah Berurah that's going to give us the background over here. But I just want to give a very quick recap of what we've just seen here in the Mechaber before we dive into the Mishnah Berurah. So the Mechaber gave us over here two opinions. But the first halacha that we have to know from the Mechaber is there is no inyan of shvisas kelim. We are not commanded to make sure that melacha is not done with our kelim on Shabbos. That's the way we paskin. There's no shvisas kelim. There's no iser of shvisas kelim. And therefore, the Deir Rishona says, you could lend out your keli to an Eini Yehudi, knowing that he's going to do malacha with it on Shabbos. You could rent it out to an Eini Yehudi, knowing that he's going to do malacha on Shabbos, as long as there's havlah, as long as there's no Schar Shabbos problem. No problem. The Yesh Omrim introduces a new Isser. The Yesh Omrim says, even though it's true that there's no Isser of Shvisas Kelim, still there's a Maris Ayin problem. And since there's a Maris Ayin problem, you cannot rent out a Keli to an Eini Yehudi. If it's a Keli that's typically used for Meleches Isser on Shabbos, you cannot rent it out to an Eini Yehudi on Erev Shabbos. Because if you rent it out to an Eini Yehudi on Erev Shabbos, there's going to be a Maris Ayin. People are going to think that the Meleches Isser that's being done with your lawnmower, with your Keli, is being done as a shliach for you. So it's a Maris Ayin issue. Okay, let's take a look here at the Mishnah Berurah that's going to give us a background to this whole topic. Says the Mishnah Berurah is cut aleph, muta lahashil. So right away the Mishnah Berurah tells us, Hudas Harifa Harambam, the Deir Rishona over here that says there's no Maris Ayin issue. Hudas Harifa Harambam, this is the opinion of the Rif and the Rambam, was Sfiralu, they hold. Daha Tanya. This that we learned in a Brisa in Masechta Shabbos and Daf Yutes Amud Aleph. The Brisa says, Lo yaskir kelov le'eni Yehudi be'erev Shabbos. You're not allowed to rent out a keli to an Eini Yehudi on Erev Shabbos, but u'b'revi u'b'chamishi mutter. But if you want to rent out a keli to an Eini Yehudi on Wednesday or on Thursday, it's mutter. So you know what? We have a Brisa in Masechta Shabbos that says mamish what the Yesh Omrim over here say. We have a Brisa in Masechta Shabbos. You're allowed to rent a keli to an Eini Yehudi on Wednesday and Thursday, but you're not allowed to rent a keli to an Eini Yehudi on Erev Shabbos. What do the Rif and the Rambam say about this Brisa? How do they understand this Brisa? They say, Hu mitam shvisas kelim. This Brisa that says that you're not allowed to rent out a keli to an Eini Yehudi on Erev Shabbos, you know why? Because of an Isser of shvisas kelim. But wait a second, I thought we said there is no Isser of shvisas kelim. Yes, says the Chavetz Chaim. Va'asya ki Beis Shammai. This Brisa is presenting Shitas Beis Shammai. This Svira Lahu. Beis Shammai Taka holds on the mitzvah al shvisas kelim, kamar al shvisas bemtai. Beis Shammai holds that there is an Isser of shvisas kelim. Beis Shammai holds your kelim are not allowed to do malacha on Shabbos. Avol Beis Hill, but Beis Hill that we paskin like, Svira Lahu, they hold that shvisas kelim ain't on the mitzvah love. They hold that there is no such thing as shvisas kelim. Umemela, and therefore, since we paskin like Beis Hill, umemela mutter lahashil lahaski kelim afilu b'erev Shabbos. Therefore, we don't paskin like this Brisa. This Brisa that says what the Yesh Omrim say, this Brisa that says that you're not allowed to rent out your keli on Erev Shabbos, if it's a keli that's used for Meleches Isser, that's Shitas Beis Shammai, who holds of shvisas kelim. But we hold like Beis Hill, that there is no such Isser as shvisas kelim. And therefore, it's 100% mutter. You want to rent out your keli on Erev Shabbos? Go ahead. This Brisa is not negated to us, because we don't paskin like this Brisa. Fa'afilu kelim she'osim behem malacha. Nevertheless, Gam Hain, even the Rif and the Rambam, Sfira Lahu, they hold the Chala Kelim Ein Het Lahaskir Rak Ba'avla. But remember, even the Rif and the Rambam who say that there's no Isser of Shvisas Kelim, and therefore you're allowed to rent out your lawnmower knowing to an Eini Yehudi, knowing that it's going to be used on Shabbos, that's only if there's no Isser of Schar Shabbos, because you're doing it Ba'avla. Avaloy al Shabbos L'chud, but you're not allowed to rent out your lawnmower specifically for Shabbos use. Even if you do it on Sunday, even if you strike the deal with Tony on Sunday, Tony comes and says, I'd like to cut my lawn on Saturday. Can I rent your lawnmower on Saturday? And you say, sure, $200 for the day. It's in my backyard. If you want, you can take it now. You're not allowed to do that because you're renting it out for Shabbos. That would be Schar Shabbos. Deserve is Schar Shabbos. And this is like the Mechaber says at what we learned already on Tes Amud Aleph, where the Mechaber says, nobody's mekel on that. Both the Deir Rishona and the Yesh Omrim agree that you're not allowed to rent out your keli specifically for Shabbos use. So that's the day of Rishona. So the day of Rishona looked at this brisa in Masechta Shabbos, and they said this brisa is Shitas Pei Shammai, not negayah to us. We don't pass it like that brisa. V'hayesh oimrim hu das Rav Rabbeinu Yoina. The Yesh Oimrim is the Shita of Rabbeinu Yoina. The Hach Brisa lo yosra mishum shvisas hakelim. Rabbeinu Yoina looks at that brisa and says that brisa is not talking about shvisas kelim. That brisa is not machlokes Beis Shammai Beis Hillel on shvisas kelim. El kekulei alma asya. Rabbeinu Yoina says that brisa is lekulei alma. It's even according to Beis Hillel. V'atam, and the rationale of that brisa is a whole different halacha. They say if you rent out a keli that's used for Meleches Isser on Shabbos to an Eina Yehudi on Erev Shabbos, and then the world sees that the Eina Yehudi picks up the lawnmower on Erev Shabbos and he's cutting the grass on Shabbos, it looks like he's working for the Yid. So Rabbeinu Yoina looks at this brisa and says, yes, this brisa is negayah to us. Because this brisa is telling us a halach in Marsayin. You're not allowed to rent out your lawnmower to an Eina Yehudi on Shabbos, because when the Eina Yehudi goes and uses it on Shabbos, it looks like he's working for you. He picked it up on Erev Shabbos from you, and he's working on Shabbos. So does Marsayin. It looks like he's working for you on Shabbos. And that's Marsayin of Amir Lakum, which is in Issa D'Rabbanan. Now, says the Chofetz Chaim, Siman Reish Nun Beis Sif Beis. Even though in Siman Reish Nun Beis Sif Beis, Issa we learn the Shari Litein Aris LaAbdon Im Chashecha, that you're allowed to give hides to a non-Jewish tanner on Erev Shabbos, right before Shabbos. And the reason you're allowed to do it is the Eina Yehudi Adaita the Nafshei of it, because you're giving it to him, and if he chooses to do the work on Shabbos, he's doing an Adaita the Nafshei. So we see that that's mutter, came with the Katzatz Loi Damim, since he's doing it for a set price, right? So if you see in Reish Nun Beis that that's mutter, so then I don't understand. You're telling me you're allowed to give a Goyish, a tanner, hides to tan on Shabbos. You're allowed to give it to him right before Shabbos. We're not worried that he looks like your shliach. So why can't you rent out a lawnmower to an Eina Yehudi on Erev Shabbos right before Shabbos? How do you reconcile these two halachas? Says the Mishnah Berurah, very simple. Shani hasam she'ein revach li Yisrael b'ma she'ein Yehudi yosef b'Shabbos. When you're giving the hides to the tanner on Erev Shabbos, you're not making money on the deal. So you're giving the hides to the tanner, and the tanner will do it when he wants. And he's getting paid for his work, a set rate. So nachri adaitin nanavshekov it. Alva b'schiras kalim. But when you're renting out a lawnmower for Shabbos, yaduahu she'im yastem Eina Yehudi she'yishbais ba'kelim b'Shabbos. Everybody understands, if you're renting out a keli to an Eina Yehudi before Shabbos, and you tell him, by the way, I'm renting you the lawnmower, but just understand you can't use it on Shabbos. Lo yitin le'schiras kol kach. He's going to take off from the rental. He's not going to pay you as much. Hilkach kevin sheyesh revach liYisrael b'masha kelim niskarim eitzel Eina Yehudi b'stama. So, since you're making money by renting out your lawnmower to an Eina Yehudi without making any conditions saying that he's not allowed to use it on Shabbos, v'oisa behen malacha b'Shabbos, and now the world sees that he actually uses it on Shabbos, mechzi kishluchei shel Yisrael lozeh. Now he looks like a shliach working for you. But even the Yesh Omer says, like the Brisa, if you rent it out and you give it to him on Wednesday or on Thursday, because now, once he takes the lawnmower on Wednesday or on Thursday, and it's sitting by him, and then he does malacha on Shabbos, now there's no Marasayin at all. The Marasayin is only when you give him the keli on Erev Shabbos and he uses it right away on Shabbos, then you have the Marasayin problem. So let's just give a quick recap over here. We have a brisa in Masechta Shabbos. The brisa in Masechta Shabbos tells us the following halacha. You're not allowed to rent out a keli that's used for Meleches Isser to an Eina Yehudi on Erev Shabbos. But you're allowed to rent it out to an Eina Yehudi on Wednesday or on Thursday. That's the brisa. Machlokes Rishonim how to understand the brisa. The Rosh looks at the brisa. The Rambam and the Rif. The Rambam and the Rif look at the brisa, and they say, you know what this brisa is talking about? This brisa is talking about the Isser of Shvisas Kelim. And what's the brisa saying? The brisa is saying like this. You're not allowed to rent out your keli to an Ein Yehudi on Erev Shabbos. You know why? Because you are not allowed to not allowed to allow your keli to do malacha on Shabbos. So you can't rent out your keli to an Ein Yehudi on Erev Shabbos. Because if you rent it out to him on Erev Shabbos, 99% he's going to do Malachas Isser with it on Shabbos. And you have a problem with Shvisas Kelim. You have to make sure that your keli is not used for Malachas Isser on Shabbos. You want to rent it out to him on Wednesday or Thursday? You're allowed to rent it out to him on Wednesday and Thursday. Maybe he'll use it on Shabbos. You know what? Like the Rishonim say, this is an Isser D'Rabbanan. Even according to Beis Shammai, there's an Isser of Shvisas Kelim, it's an Isser D'Rabbanan, and since it's an Isser D'Rabbanan, Chazal only answered it if you rented it out on Erev Shabbos. They didn't answer it if you rented it out on Wednesday or Thursday. Says the Rambam in the Rif, that's the halacha of the brisa on Shabbos Yotes Amar Aleph. But guess what? That brisa is Shitas Beis Shammai. We pass it like Beis Hillel. Beis Hillel says we don't have a mitzvah of Shvisas Kelim. Since we don't have an Isser of Shvisas Kelim, that brisa is not negayah to us. Therefore, the halacha is you're allowed to rent out your keli, you're allowed to lend out your keli to an Ein Yehudi, even on Erev Shabbos. You want to rent it to the Ein Yehudi on Erev Shabbos? Make sure it's done b'havla. Make sure that you're renting it out to him and you're getting paid for a period of time that includes weekday and Shabbos. Otherwise, you have a Schar Shabbos problem. But that's the halacha of the brisa, and that's the way we paskin. So says the Rambam and the Rif. That's the Dei Rishona here in the Shulchan Aruch. Then we have a Yesh Omrim. The Yesh Omrim learns the brisa differently. The Yesh Omrim looks at the brisa, and the Yesh Omrim is the Rabbeinu Yonah and the Rosh, I believe. They look at the brisa in Shabbos, and they say, no, the brisa is not talking about Schar Shabbos. The brisa is talking about a new halacha. The brisa is talking about Marasayin. You know what the brisa is saying? The brisa is saying you're not allowed to rent out your keli that's used for Malachas Isser on Erev Shabbos. You know why? Because if you rent out a keli to an Ein Yehudi on Erev Shabbos, and you're getting paid, you're making money on the fact that you're renting out your keli to the Ein Yehudi. Exactly how people know about this, I don't know. I'm not going to get into. We're not learning the sugya now. But if the world knows that you gave your keli to an Ein Yehudi on Erev Shabbos, and you're making money on the deal, then when they see the Ein Yehudi walking around town cutting people's grass on Shabbos, they think he's your employee. And they think that you hired an employee to go around town and cut grass on Shabbos. That would be also because of Amir La'akum. So now there's an Isser of Maris Ayin on Amir La'akum. But you want to strike a deal with the Ein Yehudi on Wednesday or Thursday? You want to give him the lawnmower on Wednesday and Thursday? And then the Ein Yehudi goes and he cuts grass on Wednesday, he cuts grass on Thursday, he cuts grass on Friday, and he cuts grass on Shabbos? Then there's no Maris Ayin. Why? Because you didn't give it to him right before Shabbos. You didn't give it to him on Erev Shabbos. It's disconnected from Shabbos. So there's no Maris Ayin. Now, according to the Dei Shnia, this brisa is negayah to us. There's not a machlokes Beis Shammai Beis Hillel, this question of Maris Ayin. That's why the Dei Shnia says you want to rent out your keli to an Ein Yehudi for Shabbos? You can only rent it out to him if you rent it out to him starting Wednesday or Thursday. You can't rent it out to him on Erev Shabbos, because then it would be an Isser of Maris Ayin. Okay. Now let's go to Mishnah Berurah. He's cutting Beis, 4 lines off the bottom, Chesam and Beis. Says the Mishnah Berurah, the Mechaber said, according to the Yesh Omrim, that you're not allowed to rent out the keli on Erev Shabbos. The Mechaber said, what kind of keli is this negayah to? Kelim she'osim behen malacha. Kelim that are typically used for Malachas Isser. And the Mechaber said, kigon machresha, like a plow, the kiyotzaba, or similar types of kelim. What does that mean? Says the Mishnah Berurah, cut base kiyotzaba, kigon rechayim, like a grain mill, the chol klei umnis, any other types of kelim that are used for trades. I don't know, drills, hammers, etc. Take a look at the Pri Megadim who says, this is even true of kalim, that they themselves are not necessarily used for meleches iser. For example, going gigis, a vat, shahashechar nasaba, a vat that's used for brewing beer. The vat is not a keli that's done for meleches iser. It's not a drill that you use to drill holes. It's not a lighter that you use to make fires. You don't do meleches iser with a vat. You brew beer in it. But brewing beer involves other isurim on Shabbos. Or a kedera or a pot. A pot is not inherently a keli that you do meleches iser with. You could use a pot perfectly well on Shabbos. You need something to hold water. Pour water into it. Or your cholent is in a pot. You take your cholent, right? So a pot is not a keli for meleches iser. But a pot is used, shemevashlim, you cook in it. We're talking here when the Mechaber says that you're not allowed to rent out a keli that's used for malacha, like a plow or anything similar. He doesn't necessarily just mean kelim that are inherently used for meleches iser. He means any kind of keli that is used while you are performing meleches iser, like a pot that you use to cook in. Cooking is meleches iser. Because the bottom line is, if the Eina Yehudi uses your keli on Shabbos, there's the Marasayan problem that people are going to think he's working for you. So what is the Mechaber coming to exclude when he says a plow or anything similar? The Mechaber is quoting the Rabbeinu Yoina, the Mechaber is only coming to exclude if you rent out a shirt, vitalis or a talis, a cloak, ukahai gavna, eze keli she'ein omed lasis malacha. Some kind of keli that is just not used for malach at all. The mutar lahaskala afilu b'erev Shabbos. Such a keli you're allowed to rent an Eina Yehudi a blanket before Shabbos, on Erev Shabbos. Blankets aren't used for meleches iser. Now again, you have to make sure that you rent it out b'havla for Friday and Shabbos. Right? Otherwise it would be Schar Shabbos. Ice cotton gimel b'havla, this is only mutter b'havla. Avalita Schar Shabbos lechud, but to take payment for Shabbos usage alone, afilu b'kli she'ein oiseh by malacha, even if it's a blanket that the Eina Yehudi is not going to do malacha with. Oisha maska lecheder loder by, or you rent out a hotel room, specifically only for Shabbos, from the beginning of Shabbos till the end of Shabbos. Not for Erev Shabbos and Motzei Shabbos. Also l'kol yama, that would be also l'kol yama, because it's Schar Shabbos. U'kabashi yispar l'kabam, b'simin shin vav siv dalet. Ois katan dalet, u'lahashiloi, but to go ahead and lend a keli to an Eina Yehudi, that the Mechaber said is mutter even on Erev Shabbos. You know why? Because there's no Schar Shabbos. U'lahashiloi, the kevin she'en revach liyisrael b'malechas Eina Yehudi, since the Eina Yehudi is not making any money on the deal, there's no Marasayan because lo yarmu shlicha b'lozeh. No one's going to say that the Eina Yehudi that's walking around town is going and cutting grass as a shliach of Reuven. Reuven's not making any money on the deal. He lent him the lawnmower. How can he be his shliach? And therefore you're allowed to lend it to him even specifically to work only on Saturday. Because there's no Schar Shabbos, you're not getting paid. Very quickly, let's see the Ramah here and finish the Dirshu page. Says the Ramah, 3 lines off the top. V'chein ikar kasvara ha'achroina. The ikar halacha follows the svara achroina. Follows the yesh oimrim. So you're not allowed to rent out a keli that is typically used in the performance of meleches iser to an Eina Yehudi on Erev Shabbos because of the problem of maris ayin. Lending, you could lend. You want to rent out on Wednesday and Thursday? You can rent out on Wednesday and Thursday, even if it's going to be used on Shabbos, because there's no Marasayin. And now the Ramah just adds in one little knetch. You're allowed to lend a keli to an Eina Yehudi on Erev Shabbos, even if you make the following Tanai. You go ahead and you lend Tony your lawnmower to use on Shabbos, which is mutter, no Marasayan problem, no Schar Shabbos problem. But you tell him, I'm lending you the lawnmower So you could use the lawnmower on Shabbos, but on Sunday, I need your weed whacker. So lend me your weed whacker on Shabbos. Says the Ramah that that's mutter. And we don't say we don't say that in actuality what you're doing is you're really renting out your lawnmower to Tony on Erev Shabbos, right? You're not allowed to rent that. We paskin like this for Achroina. So you're not allowed to rent out your lawnmower to Tony on Erev Shabbos because of Marasayan. You're allowed to lend it to him for Shabbos on Erev Shabbos. But over here, are you lending it? Lending is I'm giving it to you for nothing. Renting is I'm giving it to you and I'm getting paid. Over here, in a sense, you're getting paid. How are you getting paid? He's going to lend you the weed whacker on Sunday. Says the Rama, no, that's not derech schirus. Since it's not derech schirus, it's considered a she'ela, it's considered a loan, and it's mutter. Says the Mishnah Berurah is cut in hay. V'lo yaminan hainu she'afa pisha enam ashila chinam. Even though you're not lending it to him for nothing, kiyim b'schar. Really, you are getting paid, because he's going to lend you the weed whacker on Sunday. Nevertheless, came to lay have a b'derech schirus mamish, since this isn't being done b'derech schirus. Loimar, to say, etein lecha kach, I'm going to give you the lawnmower, kedei shetashileni kli shalcha, so that you should lend me the weed whacker. Shari, you're lending. He said, can I borrow the lawnmower? Tony came and said, can I borrow your lawnmower? Sure, borrow my lawnmower. So you just lent it to him. By the way, I'm going to need a weed whacker on Sunday. Can you lend me your weed whacker on Sunday? Sure, no problem. That's not schirus. That's she'ela. He's borrowing your lawnmower. You're going to borrow his weed whacker. Therefore, this is mutter, even on Erev Shabbos. V'ayin biur halacha. Thank you so much for joining me for Liman Torah. The schus of Liman Torah should be Megan against Klal Yisrael. The Baruch Shem should send Yeshua's refuas parnasa cheduchim tolol zenid. We should be zoichet to see the BS Kol Tzedek. B'meher v'yameinu amen. Be well.